I'm Wanda Lassiter, curator at the Museum of Albemarle. Welcome to our newest exhibit, Joshua, Judges, and Jesus, an archaeological journey through the Bible. The museum partnered with Mid-Atlantic Christian University to bring this traveling exhibit to northeastern North Carolina. Today, we are pleased to have Dr. Scott Stripling from the Bible Seminary in Texas as a guide for this tour. Dr. Stripling directed the field excavations at Khirbet, el-Maqatir from 2013 to 2016. Dr. Stripling?
Well, thank you, Wanda, for that kind introduction, and
Welcome.
Thank you, folks, for coming to visit the museum over the Albemarle and our exhibit, Joshua, Judges, and Jesus, a walk through biblical history. We're going to begin by talking about the oldest material at our site, which was located 10 miles north of Jerusalem. It's called Khirbet el-Maqatir, or el-Maqatir, and we have a Bronze Age fortress. So it was built in a period that we call the Middle Bronze III, which was sort of a construction boom in the southern Levant, which is where Israel was located in that time in history, and that would be about 1650 to 1700 BC approximately. And so we are going to look at some things today, particularly this scarab we'll go have a look at, this storage jar which has an infant burial in, and we could not bring, of course, the whole gate of Ai, which the Bible talks about, but we do have some socket stones from the gate of Ai, which we were able to bring all the way from Israel so that you folks could see them, and so we'll be talking about that as well. So the late Bronze Age begins about 1500 BC, or about 3,500 years ago, and we know that the Israelites exited from Egypt about 1446 BC, and they came into the land around 1406. So then we are estimating that around 1406 there was a cataclysmic battle that occurred. We found evidence of that conflagration that happened at ancient Ai, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go through the exhibit. So you can see over here what the fortress itself would have looked like. We have a gate complex, so there are two chambers on the left side, two chambers on the right side, or if you will, the east side and on the west side. So this would be facing north, that would be facing south. So the fortification system is about 4 meters wide, and it encompasses an area of about 3.5 acres in size. So it's a small fortress from the late Bronze, built in the Middle Bronze Age, but continuing in use until the late Bronze Age. And around the year 1400, it suffers a massive destruction, and that's the evidence that we're going to be talking about today. So over here we'll begin by looking at some of the Bronze Age artifacts here in the exhibit, and we have a cultic stand. This is part of a incense stand, probably, where they burned incense to their deities. Now, we really don't know a lot about Canaanite or Amorite religion, but we do know that this was a very integral part of their lives, and this is how they would do that, by burning incense. It's as if the incense was carrying their prayers up to their deities. And then behind this, we have a cook pot from that time period, from the period of the conquest of Ai. And if you're a Bible reader, you'll remember that after Jericho, the next site of the conquest was Ai, or Ai, and that's Joshua chapters 7 and 8, where we get that story. So this is what a cook pot looks like from that time period, and the cookware is usually red and very gritty. And then we have right next to it here a clay base from that very same time period. Now, when we come back and talk about the late Second Temple period material and the Byzantine material, we'll come back to this case. But for now, I want to show you the main attraction. And that is right here. We have the socket stones from the gate of Ai. Now, don't think of a gate like a fence gate that swings on it. It's an entire gate complex. So they're large chambers with a road passing through the middle, and this is how you came into an ancient city. So this is a lower socket stone. It's very hard Mizzi Yehudi limestone, and I know it's very heavy because I helped carry this out in the first place. And next to it is the smaller upper socket. So the upper socket would be up here, the lower socket down here, with a post, a wooden post, that connected them. And so with time, like this one, they would many times wear through, and then they would go into secondary usage. So when we read in Joshua 7 and 8 about the king of Ai, they brought the king of Ai's body and they put it in the gate of Ai. We literally were able to excavate the gate of Ai in our very first season of excavation. We hit pay dirt and found where the gate was located, and it was on the north side of the city, which is exactly where the Bible says that the gate of Ai was. So at that point, if we had found the gate on the south or the west or the east, we would have known that this was not the right place. But sure enough, it was on the north side, just as the Bible had indicated. So we'll move back and take a look at some of the other artifacts, and you can see here, this is the final socket stone that we excavated. So this was the very first one, and this was the final one. So we got all 6 of the sockets, and this was in our last season of excavation. And this is Bryant Wood, who launched the excavation for ABR in 1995, and then I took over for Bryant in the last several seasons of excavation, but he still remained active with us. But we're smiling really big because we were so happy to find that final socket stone to put the whole set together. But this one was found by one of our team members who has since deceased, and he just suggested to me that, I wonder if we turn that stone over, what would be on the bottom of it? Because there had been a shepherd who had been camped there, and we had not had access to it because of all the sheep that were around it. But the shepherd had moved on, and Derwin Kicker said, I wonder what would happen if we flipped that stone over. So he and I walked over, flipped it over, and sure enough, there was our final socket stone, just as we were ending the excavation. So in this corner, we have one of the most important artifacts that we excavated. It's a scarab from the time of Amenhotep II, which would be the 18th Egyptian dynasty. And the Egyptians created these scarabs. You can see here what one would look like. Here would be another. And then we have several that are on display here that you'll be able to see when you come into the museum. But these scarabs had the iconography of a pharaoh on them. So in other words, previous pharaohs did not use that iconography, and subsequent pharaohs did not use it. It's unique to that administration. And what you see here in this particular one is the head of a falcon, the body of a lion. You can see the tuft on the end of his tail. Then you have the Egyptian symbol here, sort of looks like a flagpole. This is called the neter, and this is the Egyptian symbol for God or Lord. And then on the far right, we have the Ankh, the Egyptian Ankh, which is the symbol for life. So if you were reading pictographically, you might read this something like, Pharaoh is Lord of heaven and earth, because the falcon rules the sky and the lion rules the earth. Pharaoh is Lord of heaven and earth, and he is the source of all life. So something similar to that is how they would have read this. Now, this is from a later period, the Hyksos period, when our fortress was built, and then this is actually much later. It's from the time of Psamtik I, and it's the only one of its type ever found in Israel. So it's very unique, these 3 scarabs. Now, this young lady is smiling really big, Destry Jackson, because she's the one who found this in situ, in context. And that's very important, because if it's already out of context, you can't use it for dating purposes. We were able to establish that this dates to the 15th century BC, or the 18th Egyptian dynasty, and since it was in context, just about this far above bedrock with pieces of late Bronze Age pottery, we were then able to use it as a major means of dating at the site. So this became very significant. And we have, just a few feet from this, we had an infant jar burial. And the actual jar is right here, and the dipper juglet that was found with it is right here. And so the way that their burials worked is the bottom of the jar is cut out, as you can see, and the newborn, they had a high infant mortality rates, unfortunately, and so the body of the baby, or the neonate, is placed inside the jar, and then it's buried, always with a dipper juglet. So this is kind of a cultic thing. We don't know how they understood the afterlife exactly, but it's some sort of baptism or ritual that they would go through in burying this baby. Now, this is interesting because the Bible says that there were women living in the fortress of Ai, and people have often wondered, why would you have women in a military fortress at that time? But we don't know the answer to that, but we do have proof that there were women living there, because this was a neonate who was buried here. Additionally, we have some sling stones from the Bronze Age, and this is how warfare was conducted at that time, both in the Bronze Age and in the Iron Age. You can see what a sling would look like at that time. And then we have various pieces of jewelry that are on display that you'll be able to see when you come to the exhibit here, with some additional information on scarabs to check out. You can actually see the name of Thutmose here on this scarab. And oil lamps from various periods, from the Middle Bronze Age down into the Iron Age. that help tell the story of these ancient people who lived at the site before the Israelites arrived. Well, the Bible says that after the fortress of Ai was destroyed, that it became a permanent ruin, or in Hebrew, a tel olam. And that's exactly what happened. So for over 200 years, it was desolate. Nobody was there. And then a little after the year 1200, we had a group of settlers came along of ancient Israelites when they were expanding out. And they took those ancient ruins and they dug into the walls of that Bronze Age fortress, and they used the back of the wall for their homes. And they built a series of small homes early in Iron Age 1 period, around say 1150 to 1170 would be the time period. And these are very primitive homes, and it's what I would call phase one of the Israelite house, because up to this point they're nomadic. Now they're becoming semi-nomadic. They're building small homes with tents that are still associated with it. Later, that's going to develop into what we call the Israelite four-room house. So at Khirbet el-Maqatir, we have an example, probably the best example, of what I would call phase one of the Israelite house or Israelite domestic dwelling. We found roof rollers with it because every year they had mud roofs, and so they had to roll the roofs every year. So we found roof rollers and artifacts and arrowheads and pottery and many things from that time period. But it's a small settlement. 40 people, maybe 50 people living in this small Israelite village in the highlands during the period that we call Iron Age 1, or the period of the Judges. So let me show you some of the artifacts that we have from that time period, in particular some of the sling stones. Here, they are many times what they're doing is they're reusing sling stones from an earlier period. So these are flint nodules that have been knapped, and they may have been used in the Bronze Age, and they're being reused in the Iron Age, and then they're later being reused in the Hellenistic and Roman periods, because you really can't hardly destroy these things. In times of peace, this might be an implement in your kitchen, more like a pounder. You might use it to crack nuts or to soften meat and things like that. But in a time of war, everything gets thrown, and in particular these sling stones. And with the hand, somebody can throw this 80, 90 miles an hour, but with a sling, you can sling it at up to 150 miles an hour. So if you take a flint nodule like that and you hit someone on it, even in an arm or a leg or the trunk, at 150 miles an hour, you very well could kill the person with one shot, or certainly incapacitate that individual. So studying warfare in antiquity is always a fascinating thing. The third scarab that we excavated at Khirbet el-Maqatir was from the Iron Age, and that's the scarab of Psamtik I from the 26th dynasty. And this scarab is different from all of the others because it's made of paste. So there was actually a mold that it went in, and then it fit into the mold. So the color and the texture is very different. And this scarab is interesting because it's the only one ever found in Israel of its particular kind. And we also have an arrowhead, this bronze arrowhead from the Iron Age. And in each period, they are diagnostic. Sometimes you have different morphology that takes place on these arrows, but this is what is unique from that Iron Age period. And this is a beautiful example of that, along with a lead sling or a lead pellet. So this is not stone, it's lead, so it's very heavy. So if you sling that, and it's shaped like a football, so it can get a spiral on it. So it can be coming at you, and it will kill you if it hits you the right way, or the wrong way, if you will. And we also have several oil lamps that we excavated from Khirbet el-Maqatir, and these are oil lamps from various time periods. We have one from the Hasmonean period, number 2. Number 3 is from the Herodian period, right around the year 0. And then the Byzantine period, and then the early Islamic period. But the one that dates to the Iron Age would be right here. And this is interesting because if you think about David saying in Psalm 119, verse 105, "Your word is a lamp unto my feet, it is a light unto my path." What did David have in his mind when he talked about a lamp? That would have been this. So this particular lamp dates to the time of King David and is a beautiful example of that. They fold them over, the oil is poured in the middle, and the wick goes right here. Many times they're held in a in a lantern. So you can have several lamps like this on a lantern, because if you're carrying that around outside, the wick's going to blow out and the hot oil is going to be spilling all over you. So many times they had ceramic lanterns that they would carry with them when they were outside. So the Iron Age settlement at Khirbet el-Maqatir went down all the way down into the 5th or 6th century. It reduced in size over time, and then it's almost abandoned, almost completely abandoned, and it's picked back up in the Hellenistic period. Another interesting motif in the Iron Age are the stamped jar handles. And we have a great example here in number 1 of the winged sun disk. And we have a type of these called el-Melek, which is 4 Hebrew letters. Melek is the Hebrew word for king. So el-Melek means belonging to the king or of the king. And these are from the time of Hezekiah, very diagnostic for the 8th century BC, the time of Hezekiah. And they're found at places like Ramat Rahel, Lachish, and they're an indicator of Israelite settlement from that particular time. So if you have the royal stamp, the stamp of the king on there, then that's probably something that is from the king being sent somewhere else, or these are gifts that are coming to the king, but somehow it's in the royal pipeline. So if you were a bandit and you were a brigand or a bandit, and you were going to rob something and you saw that it had that type of a seal on it, you might want to just leave it alone, because you know this could cost you your life. So when we see this winged sun disk, this motif comes to us from further to the north and east. But by the 8th century, it's definitely being used in Israel, and we have found a number of examples of that. When about the 2nd century BC, the site began to flourish again, and a whole new group of inhabitants came in. We call this period the late Second Temple period, or late Hellenistic period, or the Hasmonean period in the 2nd century BC. So probably as a result of this Hasmonean independence that is achieved in about 167 to 164 BC, there's a whole new culture of Judaism that comes about due to their independence. And there's a wave of ritual purity that sweeps through late Second Temple period Judaism at this time. And by about the year 100 BC, we're beginning to see this reflected in the material culture, where they're building baptismal tanks, or what we call mikveh or mikvaot, where they daily go through ritual immersion in water. They begin to use stone vessels that are not susceptible to ritual impurity. They begin to bury their dead using ossuaries in a form of secondary burial. So it's a very definite change in the material culture. And you can see here the site of Khirbet el-Maqatir, and here's some of the walls. This is a large house, what we would call a complex courtyard house from the 1st century, built in the 1st century BC, and it's in use in the 1st century AD up until about the year 69 AD, just before Jerusalem is destroyed in the year 70. Our site is destroyed in the year 69. And so it's a little microcosm for understanding that first Jewish war, when the Jews revolted against Rome and came in and the Romans destroyed all of these settlements, including ours, and then the temple in Jerusalem itself. Now, the name of the site at this point is Ephraim. And you read about Ephraim in John 11:54. After Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead, he could no longer go about openly, for they all sought to kill him. He went with his disciples to a village near the edge of the wilderness named Ephraim, and there he remained. Now, we also know about Ephraim from Josephus Book 4, from Eusebius, and from other historical sources. And we feel that there's a good possibility that this is actually the city of Ephraim, where Jesus and the disciples stayed up to the time of the triumphal entry. So this has been a silent period in the life and ministry of Jesus up until this point. But if we're right about the identification, then we've actually illuminated a period of time that we did not know much about up until that period. So when we get to the stone vessels, I'll talk a bit more about that. But to show you some of the artifacts from this time period, here is a storage jar from the 1st century in the middle. This is number 5. And this is, if you think of Jesus telling the disciples, when you go into the city, you'll see a man carrying a jar of water. Follow him, he says. Well, this is what that type of jar would have looked like. It was sitting on the ground floor inside an early Roman tower dating to the mid-1st century. So these artifacts are artifacts from the time of Jesus and the disciples, and if we're right that Jesus and the disciples were there for that month, some of these may have actually been used by them. So it's a very typical 1st century storage jar. And speaking of 1st century, one of our treasured artifacts here is a map of the city. So after all of our years of excavation from 1995 to January 2017, we were able to draw the plan of what the city looked like at that time. And then we excavated a massive stone and we cut this out of it. And there was a map of the city that was etched into stone, which was what we had excavated already at the site. So no one has ever found anything else like this. There's no parallel for it. And this will go on the cover of Volume 2 publications from Khirbet el-Maqatir. You can even see the house I was just showing you right there that's etched into the center. So it's a fascinating artifact from that time period of, again, what we would call the late Second Temple period. And here we have a clay tile from the 1st century, and it has an imprint on it of the 10th Roman Legion. So you can see the Latin engraving there, 10th Legion. It's a clay tile. And the Roman legions, when they were not at war, they did civil service projects. They would build bridges and aqueducts and pave highways and so forth. So it was a very wise use of military in peace times. But this 10th Roman Legion seal is very important because this is indicative of what we read in Josephus. We know that it was the 10th Legion that destroyed these settlements, and so when you find these fragments, it's very, very significant. And as we move to the back, we're going to see some more artifacts from the late Second Temple period, in particular, these stone vessels. So here is a basin that was found in an olive press cave. The olive press cave was reused as a hiding system during the late Second Temple period. And if anyone wants my article on that, they can go to my academia.edu page and download the article for free from there. But along with this basin, which we reconstructed, and this cup, which we reconstructed, it was mixed into a matrix which included 8 human skeletons. We found 7 females and 1 young male whose bodies had been disarticulated. They were torn up. And along with them, we found tacks from Roman military boots. Now, military gear, just like it's different today, it was different then. And they used a unique type of tack called a caligulae, just like the Emperor Caligula. His nickname meant little boot. So these are like sandal tacks. And so we found hundreds of these. The largest concentration of them was in this olive press cave, right by these skeletons. And so these people were trying to hide. The men apparently died up top, and they tried to hide their families down below. So the last moments of these women's life must have been terrible. And so it always reminds me of the very human side of archaeology. These people had not been buried, and the highest mitzvah within Judaism involves burial of the dead. And so we ultimately then turned these, after we studied them, and we were able to extract collagen for carbon dating. Anthropologically, we were able to reconstruct them, determine their ages, but ultimately they were buried in a nearby Jewish cemetery, fulfilling that mitzvah. If you've ever asked yourself a question about the Holy Grail, the crusades that have been fought, the epics that have been woven, all about the quest for the Holy Grail, well, somebody should have asked an archaeologist, because we could tell you what type of cup Jesus would have used at a ritually pure event like the Passover meal. And that's this cup right here. So these stone vessels are not susceptible to ritual impurity. And we know that from Leviticus 11 and Leviticus 15. So while pottery can become ritually impure, stone vessels cannot. And so at a Passover, it's very likely this type of a cup that Jesus would have been using and that he would have passed around to the disciples. And so it comes from Ephraim, a site where likely Jesus and the disciples were. So these types of vessels give us a lot of insight into understanding that period of the New Testament. The basin itself is important because we know from the Mishnah the amount of water that should be used for a foot washing. And of course, we read at the end of Jesus' life, he washes the disciples' feet. So we have those measurements. That's the exact amount that this would hold. So this type of vessel, probably not exclusively for foot washing, it could have been multi-purpose. But if you're trying to picture the event of Jesus washing the disciples' feet, very likely in a basin just like this. So these stone vessels are part of that wave of ritual purity that swept through Second Temple Judaism up until the destruction of the temple and continued a little bit after that period. Now also from that time period, we have two lamps that are very indicative. One is from the 1st century BC, number 2, and one is from the 1st century AD, number 3. So number 2 was found just below the floor of the house I showed you. Number 3 was found sitting on the floor of that house. So this is perfect for a dating metric, and it made perfect sense. So the other pottery and items that were found with this lamp were 1st century BC, and then the pottery and objects found with this lamp were 1st century AD. So again, the floor provided a nice sealed locus for us to determine these lamps. And it's interesting how they're beginning to close. In the 1st century BC, the lamp is folding completely. Earlier we saw in the Iron Age, it was just starting to fold. And then by the 2nd century, 1st century BC, it's now almost completely folded. By the 1st century AD, it is completely folded over. And then you see the morphology from there. So the lamps are always very interesting. So when we talk about this period of late Second Temple period Judaism, one of the things that always grabs people's attention are coins, money. So let's walk over here and take a look at what the money looked like in biblical times. We excavated 1,322 coins at Khirbet el-Maqatir, and that is a lot. One of the reasons is because we were very systematic in our metal detection of each locus. And so you can see the actual coins here, and then the blow-up of the coin to the right here, and the obverse and the reverse on these coins. And some of them are really interesting. You can spot right here the coin of Agrippa I. You see the Hasmonean coin here, and a revolt coin right here from 69 AD. This is where our coins end, is in the year 69 AD, and that's when our site was destroyed, just 1 year before the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem. So understanding and studying the coins is important because they have writing on them. Like on this coin, you can see Agrippa Basileus, so Agrippa the king. So, well, this is a historical person. Not only does the Bible talk about him, but lots of historical sources talk about him. So these aren't just myths that are made up. These are real people. The coinage bears that out. Now, one of the coins that we excavated, in all of this 1,322 coins, 2 of them were gold, 5 were silver, and everything else was bronze. So 1,315 were bronze, 5 were silver, and 2 were gold. Those ratios are staggering when you think about it. Silver and gold were very rare. So when the disciples told the man at the beautiful gate, silver and gold we do not have, they weren't kidding. Okay, this was very rare to have those types of coins. But Jesus told a story about a woman in Luke 10 in Luke 15, a woman who had 10 silver coins. Well, the silver coin is very valuable, probably about 2 weeks' wages, and she had 10 of them. So this tells us this was a woman of means, and she has her own house, and she loses one of those coins. What does she do? She moves the furniture, she gets on her hands and knees, she alerts her neighbors that there's a crisis, and she keeps searching until she finds that coin. Well, if it was, a typical bronze coin, I don't think it would have been a crisis. But the fact is that it was a silver coin, and the point of the parable is that we are the silver coin. We are of great value, and that God is searching us out, and He wants to have a relationship with us. So studying the ancient coins, what we call numismatics, is a fascinating paradigm into the world in antiquity. So between the stone vessels, the coins, the pottery, and the structures, we know a great deal about life at Khirbet el-Maqatir and in the land of the Bible in the 1st century. When pottery was developed in the Neolithic period, it set off a revolution. We refer to it as the Neolithic Revolution, because with pottery, you could cook your food better and you could store your food better, which meant you and your people were going to be healthier. You could also represent your deities in a form that you hadn't been able to before, so it really changed a lot of things. And so we see here pottery from different time periods. And the Bible talks about pottery. In fact, even in the creation event, God himself takes the clay, the earth, the the soil, and he sculpts man into his image, and then he breathes on him and he becomes a living being. So God himself is portrayed to us in creation as a potter. Later God says, I am the potter, you are the clay. In 2 Corinthians 5, we read that we have this treasure of God's glory and of the gospel in jars of clay. Now, the thing about jars of clay is they can break, and they're almost always broken when we find them. Every once in a while, we get a whole vessel that's unbroken, but many times we're able to put them back together. If they're unbroken, that means they probably came from a tomb or someplace that was sealed where they were protected. But we see from the Bronze Age where rims evert. We see in the Iron Age when they're straight up. We see ridges that develop in the late Second Temple period. Then as we move into the Middle Roman period, which transitions into the Byzantine period, you see how thick and how high those necks become, the handles change. So there's different styles, and we use those styles to enable us to date the pottery typologically. And when we're looking at the late Roman period, that leads us into the last period of occupation at Khirbet el-Maqatir, which is the Byzantine period. So after 325, we call this the Byzantine period, and about 375, we have a new settlement that emerges at the site. And they're probably trying to commemorate a biblical event that took place there by building this commemorative ecclesiastical complex. It could have been the fortress of Ai, it could have been Ephraim, but there's some biblical event that they're trying to commemorate. And we have here some artifacts from that ecclesiastical complex. You can see a cornice from the church that's right here. This is the trim that would have gone all the way around. These cubes are little mosaic tiles that we call tessera, and we excavated over 100,000 of these, and this is what the floor was made of within the church. And then various glass beakers and lamps and so forth that were part of the church and of the monastery. Many times it's just the scraps and the bits and the pieces that are left behind for archaeologists, and from that we can piece together, because we've seen other whole examples, we're able to piece together what the whole looked like, sort of a metonymy, a type of metaphor where a part represents the whole. And as we move into the Byzantine period, we get a really good look at what happened in the 5th century AD in the Judean wilderness. Hundreds of monasteries spring up in the Judean wilderness during that time. And here's ours at Khirbet el-Maqatir in the reconstruction. So you can see the church phase right here with the bema, the raised altar area, and the sacred space separated from the most sacred space, and the triapsal form. Now, our church originally had one apse, so it was monapsal. It's always oriented to the east. So churches orient to the east, synagogues orient toward Jerusalem, and mosques orient toward Mecca. So the fact that the structure is oriented to the east and has these apses is a clear telltale sign that it is indeed a church. We also had a crypt underneath the bema, and we were able to recover some coins from the plaster of the crypt using a metal detector, and then we could date those coins, which helped us to date the construction of the building itself. Now, you have an atrium area or an entrance. As you come into the church, this is a storage area, has a little baptistry here. And then in the atrium, this is, there's benches there, there's trees that are growing. It's kind of a transition from secular space to sacred space. And then the monks who live here have their own garden, fruit trees that are growing here, they're tending to some animals, and then there's a refectory and some lodging that takes place on the site as well. 10 miles from Jerusalem, so it's a perfect stopover. If you're going to head north and you're going to travel or you get a late start on the day, you make 10 miles, come into the monastery, you spend the night there, you eat there, you worship there, you give an offering to the church, you buy their wine or whatever other knickknacks you have, and then you're moving on the next day. So very typical ecclesiastical complex, starting in the 4th century and then going into the great earthquake of 749, which demolished almost everything in the area of Palestine at that time. And the Byzantine period also gave us some coins, and these coins are often larger, better made than the ones from the Second Temple period, and very typical of what you might expect. They're still using artifacts like pounders and sling stones and things like this. They're also reusing stones. So for example, we have a piece of an ossuary, which is part of a burial box from the late Second Temple period, which is built into a wall of our Byzantine church. So if there's building material lying around, then many times they're taking it and they're reusing it in later periods as well. Now, the lamps from the Byzantine period are interesting. You can see that some of them have Greek writing on them. This is the lulav pattern here. So we call this a small radiated candlestick lamp. And on the very tip of it, you can see that palm branch motif. And we could consider it a lulav, or a palm branch, or a menorah, which is the Jewish candelabra or candlestick. And you can see the soot on the end of all 4 lamps where they were used. So again, this is the Byzantine period, the early Islamic period, and early Islamic, these may still be Christians that are using these, but it's just that you're in a different time period. And then 1st century AD and 1st century BC. And then you have a mold lamp from a later period, a later Byzantine type of lamp here, number 1. But the type with the inscriptions are very interesting, and we have found these. I found this very same lamp in Jordan, I found it in Jerusalem, and I found it at Khirbet el-Maqatir, and it has what's called a palindrome. It's a word that's spelled the same forward as it is backward, like the word radar, for example. And what this says is Christ, the light of the world. Now, that's a very interesting inscription for a lamp because it's talking about light. So as you light your lamp, you're reminded that Christ is the light of the world, whether you say it forward or whether you say it backward. And so it's a very unique, what we would call eulogia type lamp. People buy them in Jerusalem, and then as they're going on their travels, maybe they're bringing them home to people as souvenirs, but they're getting broke and lost along the way, and then we archaeologists come along and dig them up and show them to the rest of the world. The site at Khirbet el-Maqatir, the ecclesiastical complex, just lasts a little bit into the Islamic period until that massive earthquake of 749, and that brings about an end to occupation at the site, other than maybe squatters passing through, until the 19th century when the early explorers like Edward Robinson rediscovered the site.